All right. We're back with session 2 in track 1 for Full Circle 2024. We're in the Understand Your Audience track. And this particular session, I am particularly excited about because this is somebody whose work as I was just mentioning to him as well, I shamelessly copy all the time. And I think all of you should as well because he is absolutely brilliant in what he does. And this is somebody who needs no introductions. We're joined today for this session by Anthony Pierri. He's the co-founder of Fletch PMM. And Anthony, thank you so much for being here with us today and for hosting this session.
Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to dive in. Here, let me share my
Absolutely. All right,
screen.
and of course, Anthony does not, like I said, does not need much of an introduction. I'm not sure if there's anybody in the audience here who isn't familiar with the brilliant Fletch templates he's constantly sharing on LinkedIn. But Anthony and his co-founder Rob Kaminsky have helped over 300 early-stage B2B startups nail their website positioning and messaging. And today, he's going to explain his process, how he goes about doing that, why casting a wide net is killing your marketing, and the trappings you should avoid when it comes to positioning and messaging. And he'll walk us through 4 crucial questions that will help you position your product effectively. And he's got some really, really interesting examples to share with everybody. We've also dropped a few additional resources on the chat panel. Right underneath the chat panel, there's a little button for resources. If you click on that, you'll be able to access those as well. So do go ahead and check those out when you have the time. And on that note, Anthony, over to you.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. So name's Anthony. Fletch is the consultancy that me and my co-founder Rob Kaminsky started together. And we primarily work with B2B companies, usually in the software space, a lot of times SaaS. And we have found that there's this connection between the way that you position your product and what you put on the homepage. And sometimes people are aware of this connection, sometimes they are not. And we think that when you connect these two things together, everything in your business gets easier. So we believe that when you figure out the strategic positioning, a lot of times what will happen is it doesn't actually make it into your outward facing marketing motions. You'll run an internal exercise. You get a great positioning statement that comes out. But then when you go to write the website or go to send your outbound email sequence or have your sales deck, any of these things will often become separated from the strategic stuff that you aligned on in your positioning session for a lot of different reasons. And so what we say is if you can figure out the positioning of your product and get it displayed on something like a homepage, the chances of it sticking and spreading to the rest of the company are much, much higher. And there's sometimes people will say, well, how important is a homepage? How important is it? You know, if you're a sales led company, it's not like you're doing direct to consumer or something like that. And again, it's more important as a place for the positioning to live, because what we don't want to happen is when you figure out how to position your company, have it tucked away in a Google Drive folder, never looked at again, which is what happens so frequently with so many companies. We do believe that the homepage is extremely important in helping set the tone for the rest of your go to market. But yeah, we in general, that's why we bring these two things together. So today, the talk we're going to be covering is Positioning 101, how not to be everything for everyone. My co-founder has used the phrase, positioning is pigeonholing, which is a very controversial phrase, especially if you're in the venture-backed startup community, where the temptation is to try to go after all markets at once. We look to the open AIs of the world and we say, well, they're going after world domination. Why can't I? And the first thing we usually say is, have you raised $50 billion from Microsoft? And when the answer is no, that's your first clue that that strategy might not work for you. So before we dive into all the key things that you should do, I first want to point out the things that you should not do. So we've worked with over 300 companies at this point, and we don't have a giant team. That's basically me, my co-founder, and our main principal copywriter. Her name's Kate Guerrero. The three of us have worked hands-on in the trenches with 300 companies, running workshops, seeing how this all shakes out. So we've seen lots and lots of patterns. right? Sometimes people say, we've worked with 1,000 marketers. What they really mean is they sold like 1,000 courses or something. But no, we've seen with founders in the trenches over 300 of these things. And these are by far the most common prevalent mistakes that are stopping these startups from getting the clarity that they need in both the way they message and their business strategy, who they're actually going after, which often affects the product strategy as well. So the first one we see that people do is when they're trying to position themselves in the market, they will do so by creating a new product category. And so, taking the example of DocuSign, back in 2016, this is how DocuSign was positioning. They were positioning themselves as the number one e-signature brand. And this was a very highly well understood category that existed for 20 plus years. And so at this point, DocuSign really was number one. And so they were positioning around their main place that they were in the market, which made a ton of sense, was super clear. And yet we saw as more and more competition entered the fray of e-signature, contract management, all that type of stuff, they were saying we need to change their positioning. And so in 2020, rather than adding new differentiation at the product level or going after underserved markets, they stayed in the exact same market and created a new product category. So they said in a boardroom somewhere, now we aren't e-signature anymore. We're an agreement cloud. And as you, the reader, you're probably thinking, what is an agreement cloud? And that's what a lot of the businesses thought as well. And then in 2024, we saw one again, introducing intelligent agreement management. And at this point, everyone was confused. There was universal anger and a lot of jokes pointed at DocuSign. And so they actually got rid of this. They walked back. But this is just a perfect example of how when you are trying to position yourself and you have really strong competition, the last thing you want to do is just make up a new word to describe the thing that you already were, because you will end up confusing everyone and you'll get made fun of a lot on LinkedIn by people like me and other people too. So every 4 years, we get a crazy election. As some of you know, in the US, we had a crazy election pretty recently. So every 4 years, we have a crazy election. And then we also get a new DocuSign made up product category. So we'll see if they've changed their ways now, though, because the hatred was so big on this one. I think they lost a lot of money. So maybe this will be the end of their multi-year run. Second one, again, when you are trying to position when there is a lot of competition, sometimes you can just say, we're way better than everyone else. We're way more than what everyone else is. You might think that we're just this digital whiteboard software, but we're so much more than digital whiteboard software. But this has to actually be true, because sometimes you truly are just pretending. Mural really is digital whiteboard software. And so a lot of you will see as we go, a lot of our advice is grounded in just be honest with your customers, treat them like they are smart adults, which they are, and don't try to pull a fast one over them, making up categories, just pretending that you're not the thing that you are so they'll try to give you more money. Just be honest about what you've created. And that actually helps more people like your brand and want to actually support it and buy it rather than just claiming things like this. So we see this all the time. Third, this is a handy little tool. If you are trying to figure out what category you're in, wait until your founder or an executive says, we're so much more than and whatever they fill in that blank with, that's what you actually are. And we've seen this over and over and over again. You know, we'll be working with a company and they'll say something like, we're so much more than just a screen recorder. You know, we're so much more than a password manager. In reality, that's probably just what you are. And just by saying you're so much more than it will not change reality. Third one, positioning around the business outcome that you drive. There's a lot of reasons that this is not smart, but first I just want to say why we do this. Every site for a little while, and I'm hoping the tide is changing. For a little while, every single site that you would look at had something about boosting ROI and revenue in it, right? They all kind of look the same. Revenue, revenue, revenue. And usually this comes from a high-level person in the company who is looking at the sales deal data and realizing that deals are not closing in the end. Once it finally makes it to the top level decision maker, they will say, wait a minute, how much are we spending on this product? And they'll say, well, it's going to be 100 grand a year. And then that executive will say, is this really going to move the needle? Is this going to is there going to be an ROI on this? Is there going to be a revenue boost? And then they'll say, I don't know, maybe not. And then the deal will get killed. And so what happens is people high up who see the end of a deal cycle that has died will go back to the beginning and talk to the go-to-market folks and say, hey, we need to let them know up front that we will drive revenue, that we will increase business outcomes, all these types of things, thinking that that will somehow influence the executive 7 layers deeper, 7 stages into the whole sales process. And the problem with this is like 5-fold. One, you start to look like everyone else. All of these companies do completely different things. And yet, when you look at their websites, they kind of seem like they all are the same and doing the same thing. So that's not the only problem. The other problem is that executive is not going to be the one initially vetting your company. They have hired people to work for them, hence they're an executive. So they have all these people reporting to them, and they say, go out and find us a solution that will solve this business problem. And so when the person's shopping between these different companies and comparing and trying to figure out which one's best for them, saying we're going to optimize your revenue doesn't actually help that person make the choice, because it's the wrong audience. The person one level higher is the one concerned about that. The person one level lower is actually trying to figure out, boots on the ground, how does this thing work? What does it do? All that. And so we end up in this weird wishy-washy place where this is just not helping anyone. And thirdly, it's just not believable. When you see companies saying, we're a to-do list app, we're going to boost your revenue. Like, leave that for the sales process. That's why you have really talented account executives who you pay a lot of money to make that story make sense. All right, long enough on this. I could list like 10 more reasons why this is bad, but hopefully that has sort of got the ball rolling for you. Fourth is really around using AI as a differentiated part of your positioning. People are starting to say, like, when we think of positioning, part of it is where you are different than everyone else. And so when people are positioning right now, everyone got the OpenAI API and used the same LLM to beef up their product. And everyone wants to show it off. Usually CEOs are like, we need to show the world that we do AI as a big differentiator. The problem is we all got the same tools at the same time. And so this isn't a differentiator. It's much more akin to something like SSO or, SOC 2, like all these like base level things now that you need to sell into the enterprise. AI is one of those. People will use AI as a way to get a deal pushed forward. Hey, we could call this purchase part of our AI, strategy that will help move the deal forward. So it needs to probably be there somewhere, but it is not the leading differentiation of your positioning. And we see this with startups all the time. We're like, what makes you different than the other people in your category? Well, we have AI. I'm like, you don't think they all have AI too? And they're like, I guess you're right. And you can look at it, right? They all look the same. They all sound the same. And there's actually a lot of data. This is Pep Leia. He's the CEO of Winter. They do qualitative research on websites. And there's a giant trend that people are getting more and more annoyed and fed up with these constant barrages of AI. And it truly is just becoming noise. And so don't listen to the people on Twitter who keep just berating you over and over and over again that you need to be talking about AI and all this stuff. So much so because the FTC in the US is actually now cracking down on people who are doing AI hype as being illegal, because people are like this are just stirring us up into a frenzy over a lot of stuff that's not even truly real yet. This one is probably the most important one and the most prevalent for what we're going to be talking about on the second half of this talk, right? Is positioning for multiple audiences at once. Like I said, my co-founder, positioning is pigeonholing. Positioning is choosing a place in the market that you want to win. When you refuse to choose who you are for, you think you're spreading a really wide net, when in reality, nobody is going to care, because what you are doing is sending out this message that's extremely ambiguous that no one can really understand or follow. And so we end up with things like this: one workspace, endless solutions. Orchestrate powerful business solutions with a single source of truth. The only limit is your imagination. This type of stuff sounds great in the boardroom, but when customers read this, they do not see themselves in it because no one sits down at 2 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon and says, I really need to figure out how can I orchestrate some business solutions, right? I'm shopping for a product that's going to help me orchestrate some business solutions. Do you guys know anyone who does business solutions? This is not how human beings talk. This is how executives in boardrooms talk when they do not want to make the hard strategic decision or bet to go after specific markets. And without going down a too long of a rabbit hole, but this is what we see a lot of times when there is an executive who has abdicated their responsibility to make hard calls. They will say, we need to get these executives aligned because they don't want to do it. The CEO's job, right, is to make these decisions. But when they don't want to do it, a Band-Aid approach is to usually hire a brand agency. And this is nothing against the brand agencies. They do a great job given the reality of why they're being brought in. Brand agencies are primarily selling executive alignment. And so they say, I don't want to make the call, but I want it to look like we're doing strategy. So let's bring in a brand agency who can find a way to make all of my 10 decision makers happy. When one decision maker says, we want to drive the boat that way, one of them says, we want to sail the boat that way, and everyone has different ideas, the Band-Aid approach is to come up with a cool slogan like one workspace, endless solutions, which seems like, all right, well, Karen doesn't get to have her product on the homepage. Maybe I'm fine then. I wanted mine to be up at the top because that'll help my P&L as the leader of this business unit. But as long as she doesn't get it and I don't get it, maybe we're all fine. And so we end up with this super watered down slogan that doesn't help anybody, primarily because of a lack of leadership. So if you are an executive on this call, which I know a lot of us are marketers on here, but if you are an executive, you need to address the root problem. Who is your company for? Do you believe in the idea of an ICP, an ideal client profile? Do you really think there is an ideal group of people who is more important and needs to be prioritized in your go-to-market efforts? Yes or no? If you don't, then I cannot help you. And if you are a publicly traded company, I will short your stock because you are not going to last much longer. Bonus mistake, I said 5, but here's 6. Prioritizing cleverness over clarity. This is time and time again, we see this where people will find these clever phrases that are super interesting, but you've abstracted away so much of the meaning that they truly are meaningless. This sounds super interesting, right? Software that keeps you running while you keep the world running. What does that mean? Who is this company? I actually grabbed a screenshot a long time ago, and I don't even remember who the company is. And I have no way of finding out. I couldn't even reverse engineer who this could be because of how vague this is. So this is not what you want to do. All right, so how then do you not fall into these trappings other than, being a good leader and making strategic decisions? There are some other tangible things we can do more at the tactical level that will help you. The 4 questions you must answer to solve for positioning are as follows. What is your product? Who is it for? What does it replace? And why is it better? These seem like super simple questions to answer, but the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into getting these questions chosen by a team is unbelievable, right? It could fill 1,000 books, people trying to figure out the answers to these questions. And I want to phrase them as these are choices. This is not a scientific, we just look at the data and then it's decided for us. This is not something you A/B test. These are strategic bets made by the company of how you want to answer these questions, because each answer is in itself a decision of which way you're going to point. So my co-founder, Rob, another metaphor that he uses that I think is great. When you are answering these questions, it is like saying, I'm going to get in a boat leaving San Francisco, and I have 2 potential destinations in mind. I could go to China or I could go to Alaska. And so people will say, well, why don't we A/B test this? So it would be like saying, we'll get in the boat, we're going to sail towards China for 3 days, see how that is, and then we'll sail towards Alaska for 3 more days, see how that is, and then we'll compare which one was better. It's not how it works. You have to get to the destination, and that will let you know. So once someone figures out a way to split the universe in half, where you can have 2 parallel universes, where in one you sailed to China for 2 years. The other one you sailed to Japan or, Alaska for the other 2 years. And then you could compare, but we can't do that, right? So these are strategic decisions that will take months, if not years, to actualize. And so this is not something you could just look at the data. These are decisions you make that will determine which part of the market you will compete in, what your strengths are, who's you're going to be going up against, how differentiated you are, all those types of things. So these are extremely important, and we're going to go one by one. As we go, we're going to be looking at this positioning and messaging canvas. So at a high level, don't worry about this box at the top. I'll explain this in a second. But at the high level, right, we're going to be looking at, are there specific types of companies we want to go after? Are there specific departments? Is there specific categories that we would put ourselves in? Are there a primary use case that we serve? What is really the competitive alternative? Who is the, for these people, what is the problem that they bring into the fold? And then what makes us different? What's our differentiation? These 7 boxes are effectively answering those positioning questions, the 4 questions. What is it? Who is it for? Why is it better? What does it replace? Those 4 questions get answered by these 7. And then everything below is additional supporting messages that we need to make the positioning statement believable. It's to answer the rest of the questions that people would have. So if you're in the elevator or you're at the networking event and you want to have the short version of your positioning, that is these 7 boxes up here, excluding this one at the top. We'll come back to that in a little bit. I'll explain it to you. So first question, what is your product? If you are not in software, this is an extremely easy question to answer. I have a shoe and I'm holding it and I'm selling it on a direct-to-consumer website. Someone says, what is that? I say, it's a shoe. They do not have problems. D2C companies do not have problems with this. Most B2C companies don't have problems with this, right? Because these are simple things to explain. With B2B software, that's where things get a little tricky because software is malleable. It could be used in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. And so one man's, CRM is another man's sales engagement platform and vice versa, right? You can look on G2. There are hundreds and hundreds of categories of all these different things. So when we think about answering the question, what is it? There's a couple ways we don't want to answer it. And this is some of the things you will see is familiar. What's your product? Well, it's a great way to make your team more efficient. This is probably the most common way people answer, what is your product? They will list the outcome of using the product, but that doesn't actually tell me what the product is, right? So if you just say it's a great way to make your team more efficient, okay, but what is it? Another way that's bad, your mission statement. What's your product? Well, it's a way that we're democratizing the logistics industry. Again, does not answer my question. Super interesting for an investor. Customers do not give a rip about your mission statement. They truly do not. I know it got you into Y Combinator and it's gotten you a lot of buzz in the PR, but humans in companies buying products don't care. And so this is not a good way to answer what is your product. They will still say, but what is it? What does it do, right? Last one, answering your favorite feature. What's your product? Well, it's an AI platform. Okay, doesn't tell me anything, right? Are you ChatGPT? Well, no, we're not ChatGPT. So this isn't a good way either. There are 2 satisfactory ways to answer what is it. One is to state the product category that you live in, and 2 is to state the use case that your product best supports. What workflow, customer activity is best suited to be completed by your product. And these represent 2 very different positioning strategies. So the first one is what we would call category-based positioning. You're making the claim within an existing category that has its own market of people shopping for it. We think we can be the best tool. We can be the best web browser, right? We think we can be the best CRM. Use case positioning is saying everyone's doing this workflow. Everybody's doing this set of steps and activities or this process in their business. And we think we should be the tool for that workflow. And so these have very different answers. Whichever way you choose to frame what your product is will determine who you compete with, who you're for, what makes you better. And I'll give you some examples. Figma. I'm in Figma right now sharing this presentation. We built this presentation in Figma. When they launched, they called themselves a collaborative interface design tool. This is category-based positioning at its finest. They are saying in the market of interface design tools, which is mostly purchased by product designers, they're saying we are the best because we are collaborative. If you were a product designer and you had been using Sketch or Adobe XD, you knew that sharing files back and forth was very annoying. You would upload it to an email, you would send it, hey, what do you think of this file? They'd download it, they'd make changes, they'd upload it, send it back, you'd have different versions. It was highly uncollaborative. So Figma comes on the scene and introduces web-based collaboration. So people are editing the same design file all at the same time, and new paradigm is unlocked. And so they're basically saying, this is what differentiates us within an existing category of tool, collaborative interface design tool. On the flip side, right, we can have use case-based positioning. Sometimes a specific category doesn't exist yet. There isn't a real place for you to fall. When Calendly's getting started, they couldn't have said, here's why we are better than all the other scheduling tools, because scheduling tools was not really a thing. People would say, what do you mean? Like a calendar? A schedule? Is that what you mean by a scheduling tool? Well, no, not really. And you couldn't call them, we're the best calendar app, because they don't have all the calendar features. They're not a calendar app. So rather than trying to make up a category with some crazy name, they basically just said, we are for people who are trying to schedule meetings without the back and forth emails. So they're differentiating against this competitive alternative of doing this process of scheduling meetings with a different type of tool. And so again, no category is featured, and yet we see this is the use case when you would use Calendly. It is actually a very effective way to answer what is your product? What is Calendly? Well, it's a software that helps you schedule meetings without back and forth emails. Oh, I get it. You don't even have to say a category. And yet at the networking event that you explaining, it passes all the criteria. They say, that's really interesting. You've answered the question. So when you choose the use case, you want to get the right level of specificity. Because if I say, let's say I'm trying to do this with Slack in the early days, Slack was not a normal category. If I'm trying to do Slack in the early days, if I had said, oh, it's a great tool for communicating, people would say, what does that mean? Communicating with what? Like, what is it, like a speech coach? And so when you are doing this exercise of choosing a use case that you want to anchor on, it has to be specific enough that people will get what you're talking about. And what we find is that there's an inverse relationship. The broader the use case, the bigger the market size, which is why people are always tempted to do some giant use cases in their messaging. So like, because they're like, wow, you think about the market for communicating, that's 8 billion people. It's everybody. But in reality, the message effectiveness is going to be so small that it's not going to be helpful. So what you want to actually do is choose something a little bit lower down, like, oh, we're used for internal business communication, or we are used by specific teams to communicate. All that stuff, the message effectiveness gets way better, and yet we still retain a pretty decent market size. So you're trying to choose the right level between these two things. So the second question, who is it for? This is sort of a question around segmentation. You can look at all these different ways that you could segment your market, and some are more helpful than others, and some will be very useful. In general, we think that the most important ones are these four. It is the things like the type of company, the target department, but you'll also notice, this is where there's a little bit of overlap. You'll also notice that the category you choose and the use case you anchor on are both also ways to answer who is it for. So for example, if I say Calendly is for people who are scheduling meetings, I'm basically saying it's this market. It's anyone doing that activity. But sometimes you will want to layer on additional levels of segmentation, like adding in a target department, adding in a company type, because those things can make your marketing so much better, right? The marketing for a teacher who's scheduling meetings is very different than the marketing for a CEO or for a sales team that's scheduling meetings. And so these are the four most important ways to segment, and you really do not need all four. Like I was saying, there's a company called Small PDF. When they launched, this is what they did. They would say, you can compress a PDF, reduce your PDF file size. Again, this is for people trying to reduce PDF file size. All I've done is listed the use case. I've also selected the market I'm going after. And this is a really big market. This website gets 45 million views a month. So a lot of people are doing this. Again, if this was a B2B motion, they likely would want to layer on additional levels of segmentation by saying, if we're going to spend advertising dollars or we're going to get AEs involved, anytime the investment goes up, you're likely going to want to segment further beyond just the use case. Which group of companies doing this PDF shrinking or which departments doing this PDF shrinking would be the most important for us to point at, right? Narrowing down your ICP. So as you list these things out, what we suggest is basically to get these giant collections of each type of way you could segment. So you would say, we could go after retail companies, we could go after logistics companies, we could go after financial service. Who could use this? Well, sales teams could use this, marketing teams could use this, customer success teams could use this, etc. Well, we could be used for this use case, searching for prospects. We could be used for tracking email opens. These are all reasons why someone might use your product. Yeah, we could call ourselves a prospecting tool. We could call ourselves sales intelligence. All these different decisions come with their own uh, pros and cons that would make you either stand out or not stand out. And so the exercise becomes a way of choosing. We really think it's going to be for sales teams and this use case, or maybe we want to call ourselves sales engagement, whatever it might be. And then we'd say, we're actually not going to use company type at all. It's not going to be part of our segmentation strategy because it doesn't really matter. It could be sales teams anywhere, right? And so these types of decisions are how you answer the first row, other than this top one, in the canvas that we were looking at before. This positioning strategy summary is really where you say, are we going to take a use case-based strategy or category-based strategy? And then below, you can see this is filled out for our company, Fletch PMM, the consultancy. This is how we fill it out. We take a use case-based strategy. We say, you are trying to figure out your positioning and add it to the homepage. We also call ourselves product marketing consultants, but our messaging is not, here's why we're the best product marketing consultants, because most people are not shopping for product marketing consultants. So while this plays a role, it's not the primary. It kind of falls into the background. And as you'll see, our competitive alternative is not other product marketing consultants. And we are primarily targeting early stage B2B SaaS startups as our ICP, between seed to Series A, sometimes Series B at the higher end, and really going after founders and heads of marketing is really the people that we're trying to reach. So now, the second half, what does it replace? Which is all around choosing a competitive alternative. Now, I just want to do a quick detour for a second, just so you can understand how these markets form. And when you want to choose a competitive alternative, it's all related to the maturity of your market for your target segment. So for example, using that same example of Calendly, when they were in an immature market and there was no other tools, basically you had people trying to schedule meetings and they didn't have a great solution for it. So Calendly comes out and positions against them. But then eventually other people like cal.com, TidyCal, Chili Piper, You Can Book Me, these companies come in and all of a sudden we get a G2 category, which is now business scheduling software. And so depending on who Calendly is going for, they can either position for this group, which will have its own set of competitive alternatives, which will likely look like emails back and forth, or they could position for this group, which is a mature market, and basically say, this is why Calendly, we're the number one, we're the first, or something like that, right? Of why we're better. Don't something along the lines of don't go these copycats. We're the OG, we're the best, all that type of stuff. We're the Kleenex. And so your competitive alternatives will change by stage, right? In the early days, Slack was going after an immature market. So they're basically saying we replace email. They're not saying we replace other Slack-like products like Microsoft Teams, because Teams didn't even exist yet, right? Loom was not going after other screen recorders because the market that they were targeting didn't use screen recorders. So they were saying, hey, for this use case of recording quick videos, you should use Loom instead of a meeting. So their competitive alternative was a meeting, right? Slack's use case was communicating with your team, right? Your organizations in the business. This is Basecamp, right? Your team deserves less. Ditch the ineffective stuff scattered everywhere approach. They're not positioning against other project management tools. They're positioning against this ineffective process and basically saying, we do make this project management use case easier because they're going after an immature market that doesn't have a defined category. Versus competitors in stage 2, right? Arc browser is the Chrome replacement you've been waiting for. This is why we're better than the other browsers. Linear, the issue tracking tool you'll enjoy using. This is why we're better than other issue tracking software. Like we said with Figma, the collaborative interface design tool. This is why we're better than all the interface design tools. Again, like you can see this when it starts to break out into those individual boxes: Slack, internal communication, competitive alternatives, email. It's not the product category that Slack is in. Slack is not email. They're not saying we're the best email client. They're not. They're a completely new thing. So use case will have a different competitive alternative than the category that you're in. The problem with using email for internal communications is your conversations are unorganized. Differentiation, Slack keeps them organized in a new way, right? With Linear, same deal. You could see that in stage 2, they call themselves an issue tracking tool. Who's their alternative? Other issue tracking tools. And so they say these other issue tracking tools, they're annoying to use. And then over here, Linear is enjoyable to use, which as modern developers, they all hate Jira, which is this is primarily who this is attacking. So they're saying if you hate Jira, we're a better version that's more fun to use. So the last piece is about why is it better, which is really around identifying your differentiation. There are 2 types of differentiation that really are powerful to use. One is differentiation by degree. We do X, but faster, cheaper than our competitors do X. We all are kind of doing the same stuff, but we do it at a degree difference. This is when you hear people say you need to be 10x better. You truly need to be 10x better if you're going to do the differentiation by degree. Figma was a 10x improvement on Sketch. Being able to have 5 people in the same design, all editing at the same time, is a 10x improvement of everyone doing it siloed and sending it back and forth. On the flip side, you could also do the binary differentiation, which is they do X, we don't. We do Y. It's a completely different paradigm. So to give you some examples, here's Superhuman, which is an email client, the fastest email experience ever made. They are saying, yes, you could use Gmail. Yes, you could use Yahoo, but who would? We are a much faster experience. You can get through your emails faster. We have all these keyboard shortcuts. We have all these interesting little AI-powered stuff that makes you get through it faster. Whether that's a 10x difference or not, you can leave it to the eye of the beholder. But this is the differentiation by degree strategy. This is a company, actually, a company we worked with called Freckle. And Freckle was positioned against Clay, which is this basically really confusing. It's a very powerful tool, but it's very confusing for the average person. So what they did is they said, we are easier to use than Clay. We do the same stuff, but for non-technical users, right? So this is another example of differentiation by degree. It's like Clay without the learning curve. Canva is very similar. Like, we're a design tool like Adobe, but it's way easier to use. So differentiation by degree. On the flip side, we could get to this binary differentiation. Someone like DuckDuckGo. Search and browse more privately with DuckDuckGo browser. Unlike Chrome and other browsers, we don't track you. So this is a binary differentiation. Chrome will always track you. It's the business model. On the flip side, DuckDuckGo is saying we've built our business model completely different. We will never track you. Now, again, some people don't care about this, but privacy-minded individuals who's really DuckDuckGo's ICP, they really care about this. And so the decision of who to go with either Chrome or DuckDuckGo, it's made for them. It's a no-brainer because they say, oh, you've helped me narrow. You just truly are different. And it's a completely different thing that will never change. So in some ways, you can argue binary differentiation is more powerful. But again, the 10x version is pretty strong. One more example of binary differentiation, Campfire is a Slack alternative that you can download the source code and host it yourself. Slack will never do this. Slack is SaaS. They want you to pay every month for hosting. They will not change their business model. I would be shocked. And so there are certain people who say, I can't use SaaS. I'm a government agency. I need to have everything hosted on-prem. Slack, can we use you? And they say, no, that's not our business model. Where Campfire says, yes, you can. You can have the code, you buy it one time, and it's available to you. So this is binary differentiation. So once you get all these things in play, you effectively can fill out the rest of the canvas. So once you have, right, like for us, and I'll give you the example of Fletch. We say we are for early stage B2B SaaS startups, primarily targeting the founder, head of marketing. We're saying that we are product marketing consultants, but again, it's not part of the main positioning strategy. It's just a helpful way to help people understand. And this primary use case of figuring out and adding the new position to the homepage. We are taking this use case-based strategy. So how do our customers do this today? They don't really hire product marketing consultants. Usually they will just try to do it themselves. The problem with this is that most early stage companies do not have the product marketing talent in-house to be able to do this well. You usually hire product marketers way later in the life cycle of a company. But at the same time, you still need to do this positioning stuff early on. Most founders are either builders or sellers. They're very technical, or they're really good with sales and getting investors excited, stuff like that. And so they don't have this pretty narrow skill set. Why would they learn that? And so what ends up happening is they don't know how to position themselves well, and they end up with all those problems we talked about at the beginning. So the differentiation for us is we have helped over 300 early stage startups figure out the best way to position their product and have a proven process of translating that to a clear and compelling homepage. So that's kind of like our positioning statement in a nutshell. And then when we walk it out, well, what really is the problem? Well, it's like, if you're going to do it yourself, this is where we break out the details. What does it look like to do it yourself? Well, first, if you're doing it yourself, you have to choose who to target. What's the problem with that? Well, pre-product market fit startups have tons of different segments that you could potentially use their products. So finding focus is extremely difficult. Well, how do we solve that? We help you to understand the options of marketable segments and give you the criteria to help you make the decision. The feature that powers this capability, right? Capability is like, what are you doing with our service? What are you doing with the product? The feature is the underlying thing that makes this possible. It's this audit that we run and the recommendations that we offer. The benefit really is the outcome of doing this, right? You feel confident that you're messaging at the right level of specificity to anchor your go-to-market strategy. One more, right? The second thing you have to do if you're doing it yourself is to choose what features to highlight. And the problem there is that by the time you've raised a seed round or Series A, the product is usually very large and complicated. There's all these features. And so it makes the prioritization extremely confusing. And so what we say is, once you've chosen a segment, we'll help you work through which features are the most important to that segment that you should highlight. And this is with this positioning and messaging canvas that I'm walking through right now. This is the feature that makes this capability possible. And so you end up getting this single source of truth for your positioning and messaging related to your most important segment. And then, right, the final piece is really, it becomes hard to translate those outputs to a rewritten homepage because there's countless ways to organize the information on a homepage, right? And you'll see that with homepages all the time. And so our capability is we help you map out the exact way to structure and rewrite the homepage for you with this bespoke wireframe and production-ready copy. And really the benefit of this is that you have this handoff from strategy to execution that's super smooth and seamless. Again, we say you should bring this positioning to your homepage, which is why when we write homepages, we color code the text alongside the boxes that we filled out here so that we make sure we have guardrails for each section. And then ultimately, we think you should bring the same positioning to the rest of your go-to-market, right? This is Clay, or the Clay alternative Freckle. And this is him. The founder took what we did in our project and started using it in his outbound and was basically saying, hey, saw you're following Clay. We've built this easier to use alternative. And people are saying, yes, I started to use Clay. It's a lot to take in, right? Clay is way too complex, great value prop. So ideally, this type of stuff fuels how you talk in your go-to-market and even sometimes how you talk with your investors. This was the founder. He sent us the Slack message. F me, your messaging is so clear. This was from a conversation I had with an investor. So what you want to do is figure these things out, get them on your homepage, get them in your go-to-market, and then it will start making everything easier. So that's my talk. I think I was supposed to go 40 minutes. I was maybe 41. Would love to jump into some Q&A. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Wow, that was incredible. Anthony, thank you so much for that. We've got time very quickly to maybe take 2 questions, which I've pinned right here for you. The first one is from Emily, and the question's right here.
Don't target multiple audience. How do you square this with Byron Sharp's advice? I don't know who Byron Sharp is.
Neither do I. Emily, do you want to just quickly tell us who that was? In the meanwhile, we will maybe move over to Mansi's question, which was about horizontal products.
Yeah. What if you have a horizontal product that targets a couple different customer profiles? Again, when you do that segmentation exercise, if it's horizontal, they will share the same use case. So you've already effectively answered the question. Take Calendly. Calendly is extremely horizontal. People in all industries use it. Like when we say horizontal, for anyone who doesn't know that term, we're just saying it's used by multiple industries. So teachers use it, big enterprises use it, retail companies use it. So it's very horizontal, but they all share the same use case, scheduling meetings over email. And so you can just target the use case, and that's where you position. Again, you don't need those extra elements always to make it work. Small PDF, same reason. Why would people want to shrink a PDF? It's a ton of different reasons depending on the industry you're in. but they all share that same use case. I've got a big PDF. I want to make it smaller. And so you lead and you position around the use case that spans all the industries. And that's why you talk to everyone, because you really are talking about one giant segment of people doing the use case. And then when you do specific go-to-market campaigns, like not on a homepage, you can get more specific. So you could say my Calendly high-level positioning is just around the use case. But if I'm sending out a detailed email outbound sequence to sales teams, I'm going to sub-segment the big use case-based segment into a sales one. So it's sales teams who are doing it. And then I can get even more specific to make that messaging work better.
That makes so much sense. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for taking the questions. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Anthony, this was absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, we're going to have to call a wrap on this one, even though we could go on talking about this for another hour or more, I'm sure. Folks, coming up next is our next session with Ryan Paul Gibson, where Ryan's going to be talking about how to actually talk to your customers and learn something. So we'll get started with that session in just a couple of minutes. Anthony, once again, thanks so much for joining us today and for being a part of Full Circle. We will catch you all in the next session.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.